Okay.
Yeah, we want to catch your pearls, Howard. Firstly,
so to speak.
thank you very much for coming and joining us. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your martial arts background just to start with?
All righty. First of all, my name's Howard Popkin. I recognize a couple of the faces. Hi, Linda. How are you? Jason. I know that guy. Anyway, I lost everybody. My martial arts background in 1979, my father told me I was chubby and I better learn to defend myself. And I started an Americanized version of Hakuryu Jiu-Jitsu. And I did that for about 12 years. And then I met someone who said they did Daito Ryu, and I did that for about 6 years. In the meanwhile, dabbling in judo and karate and kung fu and other things. And then I met Okamoto in February of '97. And he gave me a lot of faces whenever I did a technique. They weren't always positive ones either. And the rest is history. I trained with him until a little before he passed. So all in all, I didn't do the math, about 41 years of training.
Right. And I've got to ask you this question because you do state it on your website. So I assume it's not a secret. You got thrown out of your first Daito Ryu dojo. So I have to ask why.
So what happened was I was a member of the Kodokai, which when you're a kid and you don't know the rules, sometimes you do things that I guess break the rules. And I was not told that doing demonstrations was a no-no. And I did a demonstration, and it turns out that it ended up being put on Madison Square Garden television. And I had no idea, and the instructor thought that was enough to get rid of me and threw me out. And there's a lot more to the story, but I'm just going to leave it at that for now.
I think that'll suffice. So I know you were very taken with Okamoto Sensei. So tell us a little bit about him as a man. What was it that made him your sensei?
So when I first met Okamoto, I had no idea there was a direct flight from New York to Tokyo. And I actually flew from New York to Anchorage, Alaska, to Seoul, Korea, and then to Tokyo. And it took me about 22 hours when a direct flight is about 12. And when I got off the plane, he said, "Nice to meet you," and put 2 1-liter Sapporo beers down right in front of me and said, "Get to work." And I said, "Sensei, I thought we were going to go train now." And he said, "This is training, get to work." And after that, we became friendly pretty quickly. It was quite the icebreaker. I had never trained drunk before, but that was quite an experience. But he was truly a unique individual. He really became more of a third grandfather than sensei. He was just that kind of person.
Right. He must have been very unusual for Japanese because, you know, normally they're a little bit reticent with Westerners, yet he seems to have kind of adopted you. So what was that about?
So I believe that I had a few things going for me. The first was when I showed up in Tokyo the first time, I was 27 years old, and I traveled with my father. And in Japan, they have a tremendous respect for the family unit, even if the way they look at it is different than an American viewpoint. They really hold that in high regard. And when I showed up with my dad, they said, "You're an adult traveling your father. We don't understand." And I explained that, you know, my father was the one that got me into martial arts, and I have a tremendous respect for him, and I enjoy him as a human being in addition to him being my father. And I think that made an impact on him. But in addition to that, what happened was his dojo in Japan was in a town sports center, and they closed the entire sports center one Monday a month to clean the entire place in a very Japanese style. And jokingly, I said to Sensei, well, if the dojo's closed on Monday, I could just rent a conference room in my hotel and you could beat me up there. And he said, how's 8 o'clock? And I think he knew that renting the hotel room would cost me thousands of dollars, but didn't want to tell me that. And when I kind of didn't care what the cost was because the man was going to give me a private lesson, I think he realized we were on the same wavelength, that I wanted to learn it and he wanted to teach it. Right. And I ended up taking ukemi that night for 3 hours on carpet covered concrete. And he kind of looked at me and said, if you're crazy enough to do that, then you're probably crazy enough to learn this. And we became fast friends after that.
Okay. So what is it about Daito Ryu that really appeals to you? Why that art?
Kind of an interesting thing. I would assume it's similar to Aikido in the respect that you don't know what you don't know when you start out. I had been training jiu-jitsu for 20 plus years when I grabbed him. And he picked me up in something similar to a kokudosa kind of technique, but I felt nothing. I didn't feel power. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel direction. I just knew I was standing on my toes and there was nothing I could do about it. And I kind of tested him at that point. And every time I tested him, I ended up upside down, landing on my head. And gently at first, he never tried to injure me or damage me, but it was just, hey, I'm upside down now. And I realized that no matter what I did, this man had absolute control over me. As soon as I touched him, I was out of balance. Didn't matter what he did, didn't matter where I did it, didn't matter if I had violent intentions, if I didn't have violent intentions, no matter how I touched the guy, I was out of balance. And while some people look at that and say, well, you can't use that in the UFC, and of course you can, you have to know what you're doing with it. So for me, it was, how do I learn this? Because it's completely practical in every aspect of martial arts that I want to use it for. And for me, that was a major thing.
Okay. So your experience up until you met him, was that, shall we say, a more traditional feel in terms of martial arts, as it was School of Hard Knocks?
Yes.
Right.
We like to say we used to eat a lot of floor.
Right. So this was a rather different approach, but somewhat more effective.
Yes. And what was amazing is that the 72-year-old with his sake and his cigarette could control me without spilling either. And I didn't understand why or how, or just the fact that he could do it with his drink and with his cigarette in the hand. And so absolutely more effective. And you figure, I met him, honestly, I met him, his birthday was February 10. That's when I met him, of 97. So he turned 72 and I was 27. And at the time I was the Empire State Karate champion, and I never really did a lot of karate. Like I was tough from getting beaten up. And he just, took a pinky and walked me around the room and said, you're not so tough. And yeah.
So did that change your mindset as to what martial arts were really all about?
Many things that he did changed my mindset. I've said this to anybody who wants to listen. The best thing he taught me was not a technique. The best thing he taught me was what to look for. And I'll give you a perfect example. And again, I mean no disrespect to anybody. I'm specifically talking about Daito Ryu when I look at this.
Yeah.
Somebody posted a video of a Hakuryu Shihan the other day. And like Aikido, Hakuryu is also an offshoot of Daito Ryu. It was, instead of merged with Ueshiba Sensei's religious viewpoints, it was merged with shiatsu and other stylistic influences. But their joint locks are very, very powerful. They're very painful. They're intended to be painful. But I was watching this Hakuryu Shihan, and upon approach of the attacker, the Shihan was standing there, and I'm going to do this with my hands because my feet, you can't really see. But as the person approached, the Shihan took 1 foot and went like this, and 1 foot and went like this, and then like this, and then he started his technique. And if I did that with Okamoto, I wouldn't even gotten to the technique part when he would have either corrected me or walk away telling me, I don't know anything, you're not paying attention. I mean, he was so specific on what he was looking for stylistically. If your feet were moving, it was 1 step in the direction of uke. That was it. If you were adjusting any weighting to get ready, you were done already. Game was over. Right. So whenever anybody asked me, the absolute best thing that he taught me was how to analyze the technique in a Daito Ryu viewpoint.
Okay. So I guess in sort of your journey before you met Okamoto Sensei, it was kind of, you know, who had the best technique won on a physical level. And if you were faster or stronger, maybe that overcame the technique. And usually people would get hurt, or quite often they got hurt. I would imagine his viewpoint on the martial art was completely different. He wasn't looking to hurt everyone. He could, for sure, but he didn't choose to do that, unless you've perhaps been naughty, perhaps.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to answer that in a little bit of a roundabout way.
Please do.
When I went to see him, I thought I was going to be getting an updated version of what I already knew. The first night I got there, we did something like 80 techniques. And I sat down off the mat and I put my head in my hands like this. And my father said, "Are you okay? What's wrong? You're with the master. You're where you wanted to be. This is," I said, "I have a problem." And he said, "What's the problem?" I said, "I'm doing this 20 years and I didn't know one thing the guy did tonight. So either I'm a really sucky student, he's a sucky teacher, or some combination of two. And I don't know which one it is, but I think I'm a really sucky student." And it ended up being neither. It ended up being he was teaching completely different things. And the example I would use is, we started day one with his version of Kotegaeshi, which in Daito is kind of, you might call it a reverse Kotegaeshi. It's upside down. And he threw me in it completely full speed. And my ukemi was good at the time, and I didn't have any fake body parts, and I had no problem with ukemi. And he threw me in it 10 times over and over, and I got up scratching my head. And he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "That didn't hurt." And he said, "I know, it's not supposed to." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, at any time during the technique, could you ever regain your balance?" And I said, "No." So he said, "Then what did I need pain for?" So absolutely, completely changed my viewpoint on the martial arts. His focus was entirely on balance, tori and uke. But not necessarily inflicting pain. And in the 14 years of dedicated training I did with him, he probably hurt me once or twice for a second. I mean, nothing more than an average Nikyo that's held on for, I mean, like a just ow, and it was only to show me where the pain would be. It wasn't to injure me ever.
Okay, so forgive me, but I'm going to make a bit of an assumption here. Before you met him, I would imagine you kind of needed to and wanted to be the hardest man on the block, so to speak.
I thought I was.
And you may well have been in your particular locality. And you know, I only trained with you for that long weekend down with Phil, but I didn't get the impression that that was the guy I was dealing with any longer. So he changed you fundamentally as a human being. What's your journey now? What do you see as your purpose in doing this? What are you trying to teach your students beyond effective martial arts?
So that is also a very loaded question.
I tend to do that.
The first part of it was, he said, great, you could beat people up, so what? And honestly, after he said that, we redesigned our children's program completely. Now it's 50% how to defend yourself and 50% how to carry yourself as a human being.
Right.
In terms of the Daito Ryu, my purpose now is to teach what I learned from Okamoto. And I'm thrilled that you didn't feel from me violence or anything, because I do not intend to project that at all. The only time I do project that is if, and everybody's met that guy who wants to know if it really works. And if I have to show him, I'll show him. But again, I don't want to injure anybody. I don't want to hit anybody hard. It's not worth it. I'd rather walk away thinking that, having that person think that I don't know how to do it, than injure him. That's not my style. Sure. But I had a very interesting conversation with Okamoto before I resigned from his organization. And the reason I resigned was, at the time, there was an internal struggle with who was going to take over. Sensei had a stroke, and there was a board of directors being built, and Westerners weren't looked on in the fondest light by some of the new people. And full disclosure, Okamoto did not help that. We were sitting at the dinner table, and I asked him a question, and he stopped dead at dinner. And it was myself, my partner Joe Brogna, and everybody else at the table was a 6th or 7th Dan, and we were not. And he took his glasses off, put his cigarette down, and pointed at them like this and said, "How come in 25 years you never asked me that question?" And I went, so after that, I was a little bit persona non grata, and I decided that maybe it was okay if I did my own thing. And I actually, it was a direct conversation with Okamoto. I said, listen, I don't need any more rank. I don't want any more rank. You told me what I need to know. And he looked at me and said, yes, I did. And go do your own thing. And even after I resigned from the organization, personally, I had many interactions with him until he passed away. So,
right. So Daito Ryu probably gets a bit of a hard rap from most Aikido practitioners. They think it's a much rougher and more crude version of Aikido. There's plenty of rough stuff in Aikido too, by the way, but it does get a bit of a hard rap. And clearly there's quite a broad school of Daito Ryu too. So just tell us a little bit about the different schools and where they're all coming from?
Well, if you know your Aikido, you have Chiba and Satome who grew up together, right?
Okay,
Um,
kind of
both-
answers
both
that one,
whom I've
doesn't it?
worked with, both whom I've worked with personally. So I can vouch both. One is really rough and one is not really rough. But in Daito, I think it is a little different in the respect that I think the rough people in Daito Ryu are either rough because that's what they were taught, or they want to be the tough guy.
Yeah.
But I truly believe that most of them were not taught the essence of where it comes from. And the reason I say that is if I do a Shionage or you do a Shionage, they're both going to injure somebody's shoulder. They're both going to hurt an elbow if you're twisted. But where the power gets manifested is really different. And that's how Okamoto classified the difference between jujitsu, Aiki jujitsu, and Aiki techniques. Jujitsu, he really felt, or in Aikido as well, most of it was you're grabbing something and you're using your arms to turn it.
Right.
And in the higher levels of techniques, it looks like you're grabbing and turning with your arms, but the power is really sourced somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I don't think that many people got to the level of where they could use it.
Sure.
And that's my opinion. There may be people out there who would argue with me.
Yeah.
But I look stylistically at Aikido people, at Daito Ryu people, and I'm in my head judging them based on the parameters that I was taught.
Sure.
Again, not saying that a guy like Chiba Sensei couldn't rip your arms off. The guy would rip your arms off. But what's he doing it with? How's he doing it? How much effort did he have to put in to accomplish the task, et cetera, et cetera? That's how we would analyze it.
Yeah, I think it's fair enough. So what do you see? You kind of hinted that maybe not everybody got what Daito Ryu is really about. So, okay, it's only your viewpoint, but what do you think Daito Ryu is all about?
There are really, well, I could sum up Daito Ryu in about a minute.
Do you have that minute?
So when I met Okamoto, he said there are 2,884 supposedly documented techniques. And if you wanted him to pull out the old scrolls and read them to you, he would. And I said, I kind of feel like that's nonsense, Sensei. He said, you're right. There's 3 techniques in Daito Ryu. And I said, up, down, turn. And he said, yep, that's Daito Ryu. And I know that's a very oversimplification, but it's the up, down, turn that you're doing and the up, down, turn that you're causing your opponent to do.
Sure.
And depending on the situation, the one you're doing to yourself is probably more important than the one that you're doing to the other person. Because if you can't affect me, because I'm in such control of my body, then whatever you're kind of trying to do gets negated. In addition to that, if while I'm controlling my own body, I can keep you out of balance, you may not ever have enough ability to mess with me, even if I wasn't controlling my own stability. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So
that, I mean, have you finished, or can I
yeah,
ask? Okay. So that sounds to me like the heart of what the technique is all about. It's all about controlling that up down turn of yourself and your partner. It doesn't tell me much about maybe what, I mean, Aikido has this thing about being in harmony with the world, blah, blah, blah. And lovely philosophy, which I'm totally behind. It's what keeps me going. And it's the
Sure.
practice for daily life. What about Daito Ryu? What's its kind of, what do you feel its mission statement in its purest form is?
So I think Aikido is much bigger than Daito Ryu. I mean, in terms of worldwide population, I can't tell you how many Daito Ryu people there are. And I don't mean white belts who attended the seminar. I mean actual Daito Ryu people who know what they're talking about.
Right.
But I'm going to say the number is under 50. I might even say 25. And I think each one might have their own mission statement.
Right.
Mine is to spread what Okamoto taught me to good people. And he was really a stickler about that. If you did not behave properly, he wouldn't teach you. He would let you go to the dojo, but he wouldn't teach you.
Right.
And to back up what I'm saying, Okamoto's top student was actually thrown out of the dojo. He injured somebody on the mat, and it could have been an accident. That happens.
Yeah.
But in Japan, again, different cultural norms, and she was female, and he would not go apologize to her. And Okamoto threw him out. And this was a gentleman he had a 40-something year relationship with, and it was also Okamoto's boss at work. I mean, they were close.
Wow.
So he really meant that. He wanted to teach good people.
Right. Now, I'm interested because you are a teacher. I wonder if it influences your teaching at school, and if so, how?
A little bit. One of the absolute important technical aspects of Daito Ryu is eye contact. And the reason is, if I'm looking at you with eye contact and I make you twitch in one way or the other, I can see it. And it creates this feedback loop. So if I lifted my elbow and your head went that way, I watched it. So it's one of these math problems. Elbow lift equals head movement. And I know that's weird, but it comes back to, so for me, I try to teach the kids eye contact. And I think that is lost a little bit in today's society anyway, because everybody's looking at their phones or their iPads or whatever else instead of talking to humans.
Yes.
So that is the one thing I really do still think is a fundamental aspect of Aikido, Daito, etc. You have a lot of human contact, although unfortunately not for the past 2 years, but in general, I think that's a wonderful aspect of it. So both those things, person-to-person contact and eye contact specifically, I think are very important.
Okay. I think after Okamoto Sensei passed, was it Dan Harden you met?
I'm sorry, say again?
Was it Dan Harden that you started working with?
I met Dan before Okamoto passed.
Right.
He's a very interesting human being for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know, of course, but you will be able to tell us. I would have thought Okamoto was kind of passing on that internal power work to you anyway. So what is it that Dan offered you that added to that?
So he definitely was. The major difference was that Okamoto was doing it in the technique, and Dan focused solely on that. The mechanics were very, very similar. The other thing is Dan liked to, once the technique was out of the way, Dan would focus a lot more let's say, under duress, where there was a lot of force coming directly in and you had to be able to handle it. And I love that aspect of it.
Why?
It causes you to really up your own levels in terms of what you're not doing to the other person. It's not about you against them. It's really how you handle yourself.
Right.
And I thought that was a really nice piece that, while I was definitely working on, my level increased.
Right. Right. So tell us a little bit about Joe Bodka, how you met him and how you come to be working together today.
Might be the best story ever.
We like great stories here.
I have to apologize to all the females. I'm going to use a poor choice of words, but these were the words that were used in the story. What happened was, it was the first time I brought Okamoto Sensei to the United States, and Ole Kingston from Denmark accompanied him. And if you don't know who Ole is, he was the highest ranked non-Japanese in our style. In addition to that, he's paralyzed from the waist down and wheelchair bound.
Wow.
And he's so good, they made a major motion picture about him in Japan called Aiki, and you can look it up. But Ole's use of English was always laced with very colorful words. Anyway, when you first meet Okamoto, he really checks everybody out. He doesn't want to throw anybody until he really is sure of their ukemi. So he'll do a technique and he'll lay you down gently on the floor, but he won't really give you the business until he knows you can fall. And Joe, it was a very, very rough and tumble jiu-jitsu guy. He had trained with a Japanese instructor named Shoto Tanemura, and Tanemura was brutal to his students. I mean, brutal, brutal, brutal. And Joe wanted to feel Okamoto throw him around, and Sensei wouldn't. He just wouldn't do it. And from his wheelchair, Ole said, "Come on, I'll throw you around." And Joe reached over and gave Ole a straight wrist grab, in his head saying, you know, guy's in the wheelchair, I don't want to grab him that hard. And Ole looked at him dead in the face and he said, "Are all Americans pussies or just you?" At which time Ole threw him over the back of the wheelchair. And Joe went to punch him, and he locked him up on the wheelchair and rolled over his feet and threw him over and slammed him into the wheelchair and bounced his head off to it. 15 minutes. And every time Joe got up, his smile got bigger because this guy from a wheelchair was beating him up. And 3 months later, he showed up at my dojo and he said, "Listen, this guy from a wheelchair beat me up. I got to learn this stuff." And that's how we met.
Right. So beyond the UK, where are you traveling to? Well, when you're allowed to travel, where have you traveled to with this?
Most of my members are in the United States. I have quite a few on the West Coast of the United States. I have a young son, so I really don't like to be gone for that long. My son is very friendly with Phil, so I'm sure I'll be back in the UK sometime soon. In a very strange coincidence, Phil has a brother who lives in the United States. And when I started talking to Phil, he said, "Where do you live?" And I told him, and he said, "I think my brother has a gig there twice a year for the last 20 years. And it turns out his brother is a performer, and we have a town fair, and his brother performs there every year." It's just crazy small world. So we hung out with Phil's brother too.
So how did Phil make contact with you in the first place then? Perhaps Phil, you can answer that question.
Go ahead, Phil. Or not.
Or unmute. Unmuting would be good. You're unmuted now.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can with your big microphone.
Yeah, I paid to attend a seminar with Howard. That was going to be his first UK seminar, and yeah, it kind of fell through. Apparently because of lack of interest, which I kind of didn't believe. So Howard contacted me, and I said, just have it at our dojo, and that's exactly what happened. And we've had it every year since. So
the story grows.
Yeah, very, very lucky. Very lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to open it up for questions from the floor, so to speak. So now, folks, if there's a question you'd like to ask, now will be your time. So stick your hand up in the air. Or... Anybody want to ask a question?
I see Steve's got his hand up.
Steve, go for it. I'll come to you next, Nico.
Yeah, I want to go back on this eye contact because I don't believe I think you can do Aikido and Daito Ryu where you can see or not.
I should explain, Howard, that Steve is blind, so eye contact's a little tricky.
And
Fair enough.
And I don't really see. I think you would have to come in some way to the Aikido route to feel what's happening through other people's movements when you would see it. Because if you see something, it's too late generally.
So I would agree with you in certain respects. The way Okamoto explained it to me was he pulled out a live katana and put it in front of me, and he said, "You look sideways and then defend yourself." And I said, "Okay, I see your point." But his idea for eye contact was really a beginner lesson. So I'm not going to argue with you that you could do these things without it. But the idea was to create a mechanical loop. So your brain would register, if I grabbed you and this happened, my eyes saw it happen. Now, in your case, yes, you'd have to feel it happen. I agree with you. And can it be done? 100%. But we're just talking about different levels of understanding. That's all.
Yeah.
So actually, Steve's opened up an interesting line for me. So, you know, in Aikido, we talk about ki and how to extend it and how to use it. How important is the energy aspect to you? Or is it?
What is it?
Important?
What is it?
I don't know. You tell me.
I'm asking you.
Well, it is something that I feel when I'm in front of somebody. I can feel connected to somebody or not if I disengage. It's something I feel within myself. It's something I feel I can channel when I'm doing technique.
Are we talking about esoteric life force? Or are we talking about actual mechanical physical force?
For me, it's probably the former. But I think you can't have that without the other.
Okay.
It's mind and body together, isn't it, really?
No argument. So Quentin, lift your hand. How'd that happen?
Mind told my body to lift it, and my body used the muscles and bones to do it.
And probably didn't have a lot of tension.
No.
Because that has been burned into your system forever.
Right.
Okamoto would call that discussion between your head and your hand ki.
Right.
Okay. He would also talk about the direction of it. Okay. There are some very specific rules that make a technique Daito or not Daito. And one of them is the direction of that force that you just used to lift your hand.
Right.
So it starts with a thought process. Okay. And yes, everybody says I'm not using muscle, but of course you're using muscle, because otherwise you'd be a bag of jello and fall to the floor. It's which muscles, where, are they tense, are they loose? And he would describe it as a conduit for the force as opposed to the generation of the force.
Yeah.
In addition to that, the direction of it played a major role for him. And the way he would explain it is, if you had a straight wrist grab and somebody grabbed you really hard, the line into their shoulder, straight into their force, is the only line he would never use to direct his energy. And he would say, if it was a circle and there are 360 choices, that's the only one he couldn't use. But for some reason, everybody wants that one. So for him, key was being able to control that energy. And I don't mean the esoteric version right now. That's a different conversation. I mean the physical manifestation of whatever your thought process was doing.
Right. Got it.
But it had to have the correct direction, the correct tension. And then what was happening in your body to keep that force going? Because if it was your bicep tension, that wasn't it either. It had to be generated somewhere else. In addition to that, I'm going to speak blasphemy for a second, and I hope nobody's offended. When I first met Okamoto, all of my techniques were directed at his center. Why? Because that's what I was told to do when I did jujitsu. If I attacked their center, well, that's their strongest part. And if I could mess with that, then I would be the guy. And Okamoto looked at me and he said, you just said attack their strong part. Does that make sense? And I said, it used to. I'm not sure it does anymore. So his philosophy on the center thing was two-sided. It was yours and theirs.
Right.
So his goal was never connect yours to theirs. Because Quentin, you've been working on your center for a long time. If yours is good and I connect to mine, you might be able to overpower mine. But if I make mine really strong and I never show you where it is, and I don't try to connect to yours, I go over it, under it, behind it with those 359 other choices, and I never let you have any idea where mine is, then I have an advantage. And that was the goal here. I'm using, if you want to call it key, to upset your stability without ever connecting center to center and without ever showing you where mine is.
Interesting. Thank you. Nico, did you have a question?
Yes, and I kind of almost like now follows what Howard was saying.
How are you, Nico?
I'm good. I'm thrilled to see you again.
How's the baby?
Yeah, he's growing up. He's growing up. It's a bit tough, but all good, all good. So my question is, because I've always been interested in the historicity, the connection of Daito Ryu with Aikido. We know from various sources that O-sensei never really eschewed a Daito Ryu, and even up, I think, up to 1962, even his certificates basically just wiped off the Daito Ryu part, and he will just put Aikido instead. But the entire certificate would just be a copy of the Daito Ryu. At which point do we have this disconnection in terms of technique of the Daito Ryu and Aikido?
So first, I'm going to give you the Okamoto answer, which was, I don't know, I wasn't there. Okay. But when I prodded him, he was usually there. So, in my opinion, there are a couple of differences. If you look at somebody like a Kondo sensei, who's obviously very qualified, his technique, and I'm just going to use the words visually, more Aikido looking than somebody like Okamoto, who just kind of stood there. And I think, and again, everybody's different, but from what I've seen in Daito Ryu, as you got higher in ability, your technique got smaller and your movement got smaller. And I think O-sensei kind of patented that footwork movement, and it really worked for him. I mean, there's no denying he was good at it. You know what I mean? So I think for him, that was a stylistic part of it that he really liked. And it also really fed into the whole avoid conflict mentality, where in Daito Ryu is, we're going to have conflict. It may not be exactly where you want it to be, but there's going to be conflict. And the question is, how do I handle the conflict as opposed to moving my feet around? So I think that's the most visually technical difference that I could see.
Okay, thanks. Brandon, you have a question. Do you want to open your mic up?
And
Oh,
get
I
in
can
here.
There you go, you're on. Go for it, Brandon.
Testing 1, 2. Okay. Hi.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm gonna, rather than doing an introduction, because this ain't about me, I'm just gonna ask the question, and you'll be able to tell what my background is by the question. I'm comparing your experience with Okamoto and the tradition of Daito Ryu in general. Did you find that poetry and metaphor and imagery and that sort of thing were part of your training? Like O-sensei was famous for talking about the floating bridge of heaven with this imagery and stuff like that. And Takamura sensei taught a lot of his, in Shindo Yoshinryu, taught a lot of his classes, did a lot of telling stories about Tengu and things like that. And there's a lot of stuff embedded in all of that, that it's often, you're just sort of on your own to figure it out. And what I'm wondering is that any part of the pre-Takeda Daito Ryu come through with any of that stuff, either pedagogically or casually or anything like that?
So Okamoto was a scientist, and he did not subscribe to much poetry. Imagery, though, he did. And he was very much into visualization, but not in the soft, cuddly kind of way. And I learned it the hard way. One time I did a technique and he launched me, hammered me. And I said, Sensei, what were you thinking about when you did that technique? And I'm going to try my best to do his Japanese. He said, Hawado-san, go nasai. And I said, Sensei, why are you apologizing? And he said, because I have a 6-foot spear that just went through the side of your head. And I said, Sensei, that's not very nice. He said, no, but that's how far behind you my technique went. And I said, did you have to use the spear? He said, yes. So his imagery was full on battlefield, even though he was very much a peace, love, and harmony kind of guy. Does that help?
He really was different from your typical Japanese, wasn't he?
Yes. He was not a normal guy. In addition to that, to answer the question a little more, he did not teach a metaphor. He taught us. And the only limits that I had when he was teaching us was my poor Japanese. Because he would say things and I'd say, I got the first 3 words. I didn't get the second 2. This isn't working so well. But after a while, I started studying because I needed to know what he was saying.
So what's your Japanese like now?
Dame desu ne.
Hopefully one or two people on this call and yet know what that means.
I said pretty bad right now.
Okay, anybody else got a question? Jamie, I knew you wouldn't let me down.
Never, Quentin. Hello, Howard Sensei. Jamiezimran.
How are you, Jamie?
Great to be here. So I got a little late here, but I've got two questions. One is, talking about kind of this, he taught me, right? He hammered me kind of thing. And, some of us maybe didn't go through quite that rigorous training, but, we in this generation, right, we talk about the intensive training that we did and we went to Japan. How much do you think that is important? Is that being lost today? How important do you think that is to have really physically rigorous training? So that's one question. And the other is, amongst your 25 or 50 Daito Ryu aficionados, I don't we'll call them the real things, is Roy Goldberg Sensei in there?
So, full disclosure, Roy was my teacher for 6 years. And I haven't seen him on the mat since, I'm going to say 91. At the time, he was a tremendously gifted jiu-jitsu person. Very, very talented. I can only assume his Daito is good. I have to assume it's good. I haven't put my hands on him, but I would say it's got to be good. Does that make sense? He was
absolutely.
It's 30 years later. He's still training. He's training with the right people. It should be really good.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say yes.
I connected with him about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago.
I will also say in an open room that our personalities were part of the problem. They didn't mesh for some reason. So, but putting that aside, I would say he's good. In terms of rigorous training, I do not believe a student needs to be injured ever. I do believe rigorous training needs to happen. But I'm also going to say in an open room that never once did Okamoto injure me. He really never put us in pain. It wasn't like someone slapped an EQ on you until you tapped 15 times. That's not how we trained. Did he throw us 300 times in a 2-hour period? Absolutely, sure. But the rigorous training was more getting up off the floor than it was painful.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you, walking down the steps at Tokyo Station after a class was not fun. But so I don't think it needs to be damaging or painful. I do think it needs to be rigorous.
I got you. Great, thank you.
Anyone else with a question? Nico.
Well, just a question for Howard, and perhaps like others could, chip in. Is an element missing from Aikido today? Kind of like, but what is not really taking into account the principles of Daito Ryu?
I don't believe I'm qualified to make that call. I think everybody studies martial arts for a different reason. And Quentin told you already that a big part for him now is the philosophy behind Aikido. And millions of people around the world fall in love with the philosophy of Aikido. So I am not qualified to judge if there's something missing. Do I think technically there are different aspects? Sure, absolutely. I don't think missing is a fair word at all. I think there are things that are in Daito Ryu that are not in a different style of martial arts, and vice versa. That's what makes Kung Fu Kung Fu. It's different. Do I think there are things that Daito Ryu has? That's funny. He's right. I think Daito Ryu has some unique things, at least Okamoto's Daito Ryu does, that I had not seen anywhere else, if that's what you're asking. Absolutely. But again, I'm sure there are Aikido people that have things that I don't know about, and I guess that's part of the fun of learning and meeting new people.
What was Okamoto Sensei's journey? I mean, what did he always just do Daito Ryu, or had he done other arts as well?
So Okamoto's journey was, he started at 38,
Quite late.
and he was looking for a drinking club.
Okay.
And he just ended up getting good at it. He was going out drinking with the boys 4 or 5 nights a week, and finally someone said, you know, you're pretty good, maybe you should teach. And that's what happened.
So what's that got to do with Daito Ryu?
Drinking?
Yeah.
If you ask Okamoto, it would have been the relaxation part.
Right. So how did the drinking club, though, ease into the Daito Ryu? Was he doing Daito Ryu and it eased into the drinking club?
No, he was looking for a group of guys to go out with after work, and he said, oh, these guys are going out, so I'll do their martial arts class, and then I'll have them.
Okay.
And that's what happened.
Okay, fair enough. Again, a very unusual gentleman.
Very unusual.
So what are you working on at the moment in your study?
So when Okamoto taught a technique, he would do a technique and you would grab him, and sometimes his motions were imperceptible unless he wanted you to know where they were coming from. And the game he would play would be, how small can I do my technique and still be brutally effective? And that's what I've been working on now. How little can I do it? Like, if you don't see anything from a side view or a front view, and I still have complete control of uke. That's what I'm working on now.
Very interesting. What did you?
Can I ask a question in there, Quentin?
Sure.
Yeah, I was actually, it kind of leads into it. So I was kind of wondering what the connection is with Daito Ryu and Hakoryu Jiu-Jitsu, for example. And like, did you work, small circle technique, and did you come across Dennis Palumbo before he died? Yeah, what are some maybe connections with particularly Hakoryu Jiu-Jitsu? And how you see that relates to Aikido with some of our, sometimes bigger movements.
So I trained with Dennis Palumbo many times.
Mm-hmm.
If you look somewhere, there's a video series that was put out in the 80s, and you'll see a skinny redhead taking ukemi for him. That was me. In addition to that,
I gotta look. That's great.
yeah, one of my old training partners was Dara Massey.
She's my best friend and colleague. I don't know if you know that.
I did not know, but Dara and I go back to the early 80s. Her first teacher was a gentleman named John Oschlager.
Yeah.
And my first teacher was a gentleman named Jeff Lovering, and they were training partners. So Dara and I go back really far. And I probably saw her, I want to say last time was 6-7 years ago, just before she moved to California.
Yep.
But so I'm very familiar with Dennis Palumbo. In terms of Hakoryu, I think that the jiu-jitsu of Hakoryu is brutally effective. I mean, viciously painful, and keep that Gakun away from me. That stuff's mean.
Okay.
Did that answer the question? I don't even remember. I started
Yeah,
talking.
well, yeah, it's funny you mentioned Dara. Dara and I met. She was a brown belt, and I was teaching back east and doing Aikido, and she really kind of absorbed a lot of Aikido. And actually invited me to teach a little bit at Oschlager Sensei's dojo and da. So she kind of got some of that into her jiu-jitsu, and we co-founded the Association of Women Martial Arts Instructors together back in 1998. It's going strong, 20 some years later. But we used to do demos where we do it. She'd show the jiu-jitsu way with all the pain, and then I'd show the Aikido way without the pain. And I mean, it's kind of a funny thing. But she's incredible.
Yep, absolutely.
So you've opened up another question for me, Jamie. So how many women I mean, do you find many women doing Daito Ryu? And if not, why not?
In Japan, there were quite a few. I think it's no different than any other martial art, except that the general population of Daito is so much smaller, but I think the percentages are fairly similar.
Okay, cool.
Palumbo, when he died, left Dara as the world head of Hakuryu Jiu-Jitsu. So probably the first time there's been a woman Shihan heading the international organization. And she's doing an amazing job too.
Cool.
She absolutely is.
And what have you been doing over the pandemic, Howard?
Taking care of my son.
Really? So pretty much did you go to online training in any form?
So I don't know if you could tell, I'm actually in the back room of my dojo now. Hang on a second. Sorry.
Oh yeah, it's coming into, yep, very nice. Class is on.
Yep. So we've been working with the kids. Everybody's still at 6 feet in the dojo. We're not doing grabbing techniques, so we're practicing a lot of striking. Getting the kids good at that. All right, I'm gonna turn on lights.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Is that better?
Yeah, that's fine. It's all good. It's all good.
I
Okay.
apologize. It's gonna get a little loud now.
Any more questions? Yeah, Warren.
Okay, I'm muted. Howard, good to see you again. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I can. How are you?
Good. Last time I think we got together, it was at the airport, at Kennedy Airport, or it was in one of your Sistema workshops. Are you still
Right.
working with Sistema?
No, I actually never really did. There was a Sistema instructor that was borrowing my dojo, so every once in a while I would take a class with him, but I never really did Sistema.
Okay.
Okay.
It's cool stuff though.
One class was enough.
Okay, last opportunity. Anyone else got another question?
Yeah, I've got one question.
Go, Phil.
Hi, Sensei. Any idea when you might come to the UK this next year?
Shocking that you would ask that. Working on it. I'm hoping for next summer.
Roger that.
Okay. I just want to thank you for showing up, Howard, and giving us your time. Very, very interesting. Really enjoyed it. I think everybody else did too. So just
when we do go to the UK, all you guys can jump in. That'd be awesome.
yeah. Well, I'll be there when you turn up.
Great.
Yeah,
So at
you're
least
very
there'll be two of us, won't there, Phil? There'll be at least you and me, and
Yeah.
Nico might show up as
absolutely.
well.
Yeah, you were the
Yes,
first guys to book on.
Absolutely.
Everybody's welcome though. Come and grab hold of Howard and yeah, find out what it's all about.
All right, I'm gonna go beat up kids.
Okay, everybody else, hang on just for a second. I'm going to stop the recording.